Uhuru, my name is Mariah, and welcome to part two of Burning Spear Media's reenactment of the Uhuru 3 anti-colonial free speech trial of the century. Before we begin the reenactment, I want to let you know that the Uhuru 3 were found not guilty of acting as agents of the Russian government. In a contradictory and unjust verdict, they were found guilty of conspiring to act as agents of the Russian government. They will return to the Tampa Federal Courthouse on December 16th for their sentencing hearing. The government wants to lock up 83-year-old Chairman Amali, Penny Hess, and Jesse Neville for 5 years and to fine them $250,000 each. Freedom-loving people say not one day in prison. Everyone is encouraged to attend the sentencing hearing on December 16th to show your support for the Uhuru 3. Learn more at www.handsoffyahoo.org. In episode 1, we reminded you that on July 29, 2022, the FBI conducted violent military pre-dawn raids on 7 homes and offices of the Uhuru Black Freedom Movement, including that of its founder and leader, Chairman Amali Yeshitela, employing tanks, drones, flashbang grenades, and battering rams. Flak-jacketed soldiers trained laser-guided automatic weapons on the bodies of then 81-year-old Chairman Amali and his wife, Onazine Yeshitela, as they emerged from their front door in the impoverished Black community of North St. Louis. No arrests were made at that time, but $40,000 in damage was done to the 7 properties, and the FBI seized all of the occupants' computers, phones, hard drives, and boxes of files. 9 months later, on April 18, 2023, the Uhuru 3 chairman Amali Yeshitela and 2 leaders of the Uhuru movement's white solidarity and reparations component, Penny Hess and Jesse Neville, were indicted on 2 baseless charges of acting as unregistered agents of the Russian government and of conspiring to act as unregistered agents of the Russian government. They reported for arraignment in May of 2023, and they were put into leg irons, retained in holding cells, had their passports taken, and then were released on bond. They are now required to report weekly to pretrial monitoring officers and to get permission from the government before traveling across state lines. In September of 2024, the week-long trial of the Uhuru 3 was held in Tampa Federal Court. The court was packed with supporters from around the U.S. and across the whole political spectrum. Burning Spear Media is proud to present a 3-part reenactment of the historic Uhuru 3 anti-colonial free speech trial of the century, where the government's conspiracy to gut the First Amendment was exposed. In episode 1, we learned about the background of the case with excerpts from the indictment and the pretrial motions, and then saw the beginning of the trial with jury selection and the judge's initial instructions to the jury. Today, in episode 2, we'll take you inside the courtroom for the opening arguments and the testimony of key government witnesses that reveals the government's conspiracy to mislead the jury and spread misinformation to the public about the Department of Justice's blatant attack on the First Amendment. The government began their courtroom attack with their opening argument, of which we present excerpts from the court transcript.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Menno Goodman. Together with my colleagues Daniel Marcet and Risha Asokan, we represent the United States. The evidence in this case will show that the defendants acted at the direction of the Russian government. The defendants drafted, published, and submitted a petition to the United Nations accusing the United States of committing genocide against African Americans. The defendants carried out a multi-city, multi-day protest envisioned and funded by the Russians. The defendants published articles on topics and on terms dictated by the Russians. The defendants provided information to the Russians on ongoing political campaigns, including one where defendant Jesse Neville was the candidate. The defendants used their public platforms, their radio station, their website, their newspaper to support Russia in, quote, its information war, end quote, against the United States. For these actions, the defendants are charged with 2 counts. That's 2 separate federal crimes. First, all 4 defendants are charged with conspiring to act as foreign agents of the Russian government. This is a conspiracy charge. For now, just think of the conspiracy as an agreement to commit a crime. The second charge, defendants Yeshitela, Hess, and Neville are charged with actually acting right here as agents of the Russian government.
Next, the jurors heard from Uhuru 3 attorney Addie Griffin. Here are the excerpts from her opening argument as recorded in the court transcripts. Let's check that out.
Omali Yeshitela is innocent. Penny Hess is innocent. And Jesse Neville is innocent. This is a case about censorship. The evidence will show that this case is a direct attack by the US government in an attempt to censor the political views and beliefs of the African People's Socialist Party, Omali Yeshitela, Penny Hess, and Jesse Neville. Omali Yeshitela was born on October 9th, 1941 in St. Petersburg, Florida, and has been an activist his entire life. He is the author of over 15 books and numerous pamphlets. In the 1960s, Omali Yeshitela joined the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, during the Civil Rights Movement. The evidence will show that in 1968, he created the Burning Spear newspaper. The evidence will show that the Burning Spear has published articles that protested every single war the United States has ever been in during Omali's lifetime. From its first issue in 1969, the Burning Spear addressed critical issues, including the genocide of Black people. The Burning Spear newspaper has traditionally offered information, facts, and opinions to the people of the United States and around the world that are oftentimes not found in mainstream media. The Burning Spear newspaper also provides a medium for citizens of our country, along with people from other countries, to publish articles discussing their views on important events here and around the globe. In 1972, Omali formed the APSP to lead the struggle of African working class people and others oppressed by US capitalism and colonialism. The party has consistently advocated for peace, dignity, and self-determination for Black and African people globally. Omali Yeshitela has dedicated his life to the liberation of African people with the guidance and help of the members of the APSP. In 1976, the APSP created the African People's Solidarity Committee, APSC, a predominantly white branch led by Penny Hess for 47 years. APSC advocates for reparations to Black people worldwide. The evidence will show that the crime of genocide and the reparations due has been the primary focus and life work of Chairperson Penny Hess. In fact, in 2001, well before any of the Russians mentioned by the government, Penny Hess published a book on the history of genocide titled Overturning the Culture of Violence. The APSP popularized the term reparations, organizing over 12 tribunals on the subject since 1982 and leveraging international law to press their case. So it should come as no surprise that in 2015, Penny Hess spearheaded a petition to the United Nations charging the US government with genocide. The APSP has built tangible opportunities within African communities such as farmers markets, basketball courts, community kitchens, health centers, housing opportunities, resume and skill training programs, just to name a few. Omali Yeshitela has championed reparations on the global stage, traveling to countries including South Africa, Liberia, and Russia. Again, it should come as absolutely no surprise that you will learn that Omali Yeshitela formed a partnership with a man named Alexander Ionov, the leader of the anti-globalization movement of Russia, a non-governmental organization. The evidence will show that the anti-globalization movement of Russia, which was led by Alexander Ionov, promoted similar ideologies in line with the African People's Socialist Party. The government alleges the APSP acted under Russian direction, accusing them of promoting their political views at the behest of a foreign entity. However, The evidence will show that the APSP's political objectives have been consistent for over 50 years, rooted in African liberation and reparations. This case is not about agreeing or disagreeing with the APSP's views. It is about their constitutional right to express them. Whether or not you share their beliefs, their ability to voice them must be upheld.
Imagine this story of African liberation was presented in a U.S. federal court to a jury. Then Uhuru 3 attorney Leonard Goodman presented his opening argument. And here are excerpts from his opening argument as recorded in the court transcripts.
Picture in your head an agent of a foreign government. You probably will picture a person motivated by greed, willing to sell out their country to obtain sensitive information and transfer it to some foreign government in order to harm the United States. And then let me tell you about Penny Hess. Penny is 78 years old. She's from Louisville, Kentucky, where she grew up in the 50s and 60s. In 1976, she heard Chairman Omali Yeshitela speak about the history of African people, colonization and enslavement, and the fight for liberation. She was not political at the time, but she was moved by what she heard. She said, "I want to help. This is what I want to do with my life." And she spent the next nearly 50 years working for the African People's Socialist Party. For much of that time, they didn't have the money to pay her, and she worked as a volunteer while holding jobs as a waitress and a temp secretary. She is absolutely devoted to the cause. The government begins its version of events in May 2015 when the African People's Socialist Party received an invitation for Omali Yeshitela to present at a conference in Moscow. This was not unusual for the party. Omali Yeshitela has participated in conferences in close to 20 foreign countries, including Africa, Northern Ireland, Spain, England, and Jamaica. The Moscow conference brought together activists and groups against war and colonialism. It was hosted by the Anti-Globalization Movement of Russia, the AGMR, which is a non-governmental organization. The African People's Socialist Party is also a not-for-profit group. It is not a wealthy organization and relies entirely on supporters. As Penny mentioned, they do community work, lifting people up in poor and Black communities in St. Petersburg, Florida, St. Louis, and other US cities where they have a presence. The evidence will show that the African People's Socialist Party and Penny Hess have held the same principles and beliefs for 50 years. These principles did not change after Omali Yeshitela visited Moscow in May 2015. The government's theory is puzzling because there is no dispute that their views on these issues have been consistent for decades. Yet the government suggests that even though this group has been saying the same thing for 50 years, after May 2015, they were saying it for Russia. You will hear about money raised. The evidence will show that as a not-for-profit, it is legal to raise money, including from foreigners. The government knows this. The real issue, as the evidence will show, is that these defendants hold views that sometimes align with Russia during a time when the US government tells us to hate and fear Russia. The African People's Socialist Party is critical of US foreign policy, has a large following, and owns a newspaper that communicates directly with many people, making them a perceived threat. At a second Moscow conference in 2015 called the Dialogue of Nations, the African People's Socialist Party was invited to present. The AGMR had one condition: some separatist groups would attend, and they wanted the party to declare support for an African American separatist state. Penny Hess sent the AGMR a response authored by Chairman Omali Yeshitela, stating that the party's position is one of unconditional solidarity with indigenous people of US and Mexico. They do not support Africans taking land stolen from indigenous peoples and Mexicans to declare a state. The party's position was clear: we don't change our views for anyone. The AGMR still wanted the chairman to attend. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence will show that Penny Hess and her colleagues hold strong principles. You will not hear any evidence that Penny has ever compromised her principles to become a mercenary or activist on behalf of Russia or anyone else.
You will not hear any evidence that Penny has ever compromised her principles, and that's right. And lastly, we hear from Uhuru 3 attorney Mutaki Akbar with excerpts from his opening argument as recorded in the court transcripts.
Uhuru, you heard this word stated repeatedly throughout this trial. Uhuru is a Swahili word meaning freedom. That's how significant it is to this organization. They say it when they greet each other. The freedom to protest against the government when they disagree with it. The freedom to send petitions to the United Nations when they believe genocide is being committed against the African American community. The freedom to stand with nations that our government portrays as a boogeyman. That's what this case is about. Let me tell you about Jesse Neville. He came to St. Petersburg in 2008 as a student at the University of South Florida, volunteering for voting advocacy groups and registering people to vote. In 2010, he heard Omali Yeshitela and Penny Hess speak on campus. Their message about white people being allies to the Black community resonated with him. He began working with the organization and by 2014 became chair of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. In 2014, the relevance of the African People's Socialist Party, APSP, was peaking. Eric Gardner was killed by law enforcement in July and Michael Brown in August. People around the world were reaching out to organizations like APSP asking, how could we help spread the message about what was happening in America? Among the countries reaching out was Russia. Alexander Ionov, a Russian national, said he wanted to help. In December 2014, he wrote an article in the Burning Spear. By May 2015, amid rising protests, Ionov invited someone from APSP to speak in Russia. The chairman went and spoke openly. Evidence shows he appeared on news channels, the Burning Spear and YouTube, saying, I just got back from Russia, and here's what I told them. And here's how they will help us continue this movement. This began the relationship. In September 2015, the chairman returned to Russia, spreading the same message. Meanwhile, police killings in the United States continue. At Ionov's suggestion, APSP created a petition for submission to the United Nations. They drafted it in their own words, outlining their demands. After gathering thousands of signatures, they sought to bring further attention to it. APSP decided to organize encampment tours around 6 cities coinciding with the United Nations tour. They visited Chicago, New York, DC, Jackson, and more, broadcasting their efforts transparently on Facebook. Ionov, through his organization, AGMR, pledged to fund the tour. APSP provided a $12,000 budget for expenses. In the middle of the tour, Penny Hess followed up on the funding. Ionov's secretary requested videos and reports of attendance. Omali Yeshitela responded via email, I quote, I want to make it very clear that we are not your employees. We are your allies, and we need you to act accordingly, end quote. The evidence will show this was an alliance, not subservience. After the tour, Ionov sporadically pledged small amounts to the ASP programs, $500 here, $1,000 there. Just like other donors, all transactions were public. In 2022, when the war began, APSP had long maintained that Russia was right. They held a workshop to establish their position on the Russia-Ukraine war before any discussion with Ionov. Ultimately, the case involves a group in the US exercising its freedom of speech and a foreign nation aligning with some of its views. The government portrays Russia as the boogeyman, someone we shouldn't talk to or agree with. But aligning views does not make it criminal. That's why we're here.
Thank you, Attorney Akbar. And that is exactly why we're here. So those were excerpts from the opening arguments delivered by the government's prosecutors and the Uhuru 3 attorneys. When we return from a short break, we'll hear trial transcripts, excerpts from the examination and cross-examination of the government's witnesses.
Uhuru, my name is Soliana Bakel, and I'm the managing editor of the Burning Spear newspaper, and I hope you're enjoying this program as much as I am. I, of course, want to salute our chairman, Amalia Shatella, who is the founder of the Burning Spear, and who today faces 5 years in prison for speaking out on behalf of the African nation. And we, of course, want to salute Deputy Chair Ona Zanaya Shatella, whose tireless work as architect of the Black Power Blueprint is turning the chairman's vision for African self-determination into reality. If you've been following the news of the Uhuru 3 anti-colonial free speech trial of the century, your best source of information has been the Burning Spear newspaper, the burningspear.com website, and the Burning Spear TV channel on YouTube. But Burning Spear Media doesn't only publish a monthly newspaper and broadcast programs online. We also publish books, pamphlets, posters, and other merchandise to spread out and popularize the philosophy of African internationalism developed by our very own Chairman Amalia over the past 6 decades. That is longer than I've been alive. And so we urge you to buy and read these books that the FBI doesn't want you to have, and to share this amazing collection with your friends and family as well. So if you haven't read them yet, you should go online now and purchase one or all of the books currently available on the burningspear.store. Our most recent publication is titled The Verdict is in Reparations Now. You can see that right here as well as on the screen. This book is an expanded edition of a report from the 1982 World Tribunal on Reparations to African People. In 1982, the APSP, the African People's Socialist Party, hosted the first World Tribunal on Reparations for African people in the US in Brooklyn, New York. We used international law to put the US government on trial for genocide against African people. An international panel of judges ruled that the US owed $4.1 trillion in reparations to African people. And this book, The Verdict is in Reparations Now, contains Chairman O'Malley's statements as people's advocate, as well as testimonies from African workers, academics, and experts who took the stand at the tribunal. And this included Professor Leonard Jeffries, Afeni Shakur, who is Black Panther leader and mother of Tupac Shakur, Professor Del Hunter, Attica prison resistor Akil Al-Jundi, political prisoner Mafundi Lake, healthcare advocate Adbun Adeluna, and more. In the next segment of this reenactment of the Uhuru 3 anti-colonial free speech trial, you'll hear the government say that it was the Russian government who directed the Uhuru movement to testify at United Nations hearings that prompted the UN to call for reparations for Black people in the US. The struggle for reparations for African people in the US and around the world was not a Russian idea. It came straight out of the 400-year fight of African people to reclaim the value of the labor, lives, and resources that were stolen from us through colonialism. And next up in Amalia Shatella Speaks, Burning Spear Media presents an assortment of the writings and speeches of O'Malley, including the entire text of his speech, Wolves, which was actually popularized in the groundbreaking Let's Get Free album by the hip-hop group Dead Press. So you might also know from that. We also have One Africa, One Nation, which is a compilation of African internationalist articles by various authors, including Chairman O'Malley and African Socialist International Secretary General Louis Kinshasa. So Burning Spear offers the entire political report by Chairman O'Malley from the last 2 Congresses of the African People's Socialist Party, in which he summarized the world situation, the work of the Uhuru movement, and the way forward. Burning Spear has also published Overturning the Culture of Violence, this behemoth of the book by African People's Solidarity Committee Chairwoman Penny Hess, another one of the Uhuru 3, tried for acting as an agent of Russia. So in vivid detail, the seminal work traces the establishment of colonial capitalism on the backs of African people and the active participation of everyday white people in colonial violence. It exposes the material basis of white opportunism, and it calls for a new relationship of solidarity and reparation. So if you're looking for something meaningful to give a friend, a family member, especially, or a loved one or an associate, I urge you to go to the burningspear.store and give the gift of knowledge and understanding. This is the burningspear.store. And when you make a purchase on the burningspear.store, you're supporting the right of the African working class to speak our own reality, come to our own conclusions, and plot a course for our own liberation. So in these books, you'll find the truth that the FBI wants to silence, and you can help this independent African-owned publishing house to thrive and grow. So thank you so much. And back to you, Mariah, and the Burning Spear media readers, Theater Truth. Uhuru.
Thank you, Soliana. And come on, y'all, hit up that the burningspear.store and give that gift of knowledge from this African-owned publishing house. It's the holidays. This is a perfect gift. Now, the government's first witness was Professor Brian Taylor, director of the Moynihan Institute of Global Affairs at Syracuse University. Taylor's written 3 books about the workings of the Russian government following the 1991 disbanding of the Soviet Union. On the stand, Taylor testified that his research did not provide any information showing that the anti-globalization movement of Russia or its president, Alexander Ionov, were part of the Russian government. Uhuru 3 attorney Leonard Goodman pushed Taylor to admit that the U.S. intervention and NATO expansion led to Russian military action in Ukraine. As you'll see, the prosecution did not want the jury to hear this perspective. That's why they'll go so far to hide this information from the public, that they'll spend millions of dollars to silence the Uhuru 3 by putting them in prison. In this excerpt from the trial transcript, we start with Uhuru 3 attorney Leonard Goodman.
Is it true that there was a coup in 2014 where the democratically elected president of Ukraine named Yanukovych was removed forcibly?
No, I would not characterize it that way.
But he was removed from office, correct?
He did leave the country, yes, and therefore the position was vacant.
And is it true that United States officials, including the CIA, were involved in the efforts to remove Yanukovych from office?
Objection, beyond scope.
Overruled.
I have no information about the CIA having anything to do with the revolution that took place in Kiev in 2014.
Are you aware that Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland was caught on tape discussing replacing Yanukovych in January of 2014 before Yanukovych was removed?
Same objection.
Overruled.
I would interpret the contents of the conversation differently.
Would you describe Yanukovych as a Russian-friendly president?
Yes, for the most part.
And he was replaced with someone who was more US and NATO friendly?
Yeah, his successor was more friendly towards the West.
And when President Poroshenko came in, that's when the conflict started, where there was fighting and fighting with the people in Donbass, who you've already described as Russian identifying. Is that true?
Well, the conflict actually started in February 2014 when Russia sent military personnel into the region of Crimea and illegally annexed that territory from Ukraine.
And that was in response to the removal of Yanukovych. Is that true?
That precipitated the event, yes.
You testified about how the relations deteriorated since the Cold War. Was the expansion of NATO into the former Soviet countries a factor in the deterioration of the relationship, in your opinion?
The fact that some East European countries, including 3 that had been members of the Soviet Union, invited to join NATO was part of the process, yes. Russia did not like that.
NATO expanded to some 13 or 14 countries close to Russia, is that correct?
Some of them are close to Russia.
But NATO did expand east towards the border of Russia. Isn't that true? And when it expanded into Poland, Hungary, the Czech Republic, Croatia, Albania, and Romania, US military bases were put in those countries. Is that correct?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained. We're beyond the scope.
Just one more thing. Would you agree that the efforts of the United States to bring Ukraine into NATO has been a major cause of conflict?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Well, we know that the installation of U.S. military bases so close to Russia's border has been an essential threat to Russian sovereignty. And now we've seen that U.S. personnel carry out the direct hands-on launch of ACTIVs, missiles from Ukraine against targets inside Russia, prompting Russia to launch its new, apparently unstoppable Re-enactment missile to destroy a munitions factory in Ukraine. Advocates for peace and international cooperation continue to call for an end to U.S. gun running and funding of foreign wars. So next, the prosecution called up FBI Special Agent Michael Klapik, a computer analyst who described the intelligence agency's surveillance and infiltration methods. And after him was Erie Droop, an FBI agent designed to FBI's Tampa field office. Irie's job on the stand was to read emails, Facebook messages, Skype transcripts, and other documents apparently compiled for her by other FBI employees at the direction of case agent Kelly Bowen. Prosecutor Marset introduced to evidence a document that Droop said was an attachment found in Penny Hess's Facebook records.
So, just starting at the very top, can you please tell the jury what we're looking at here?
We have the logo for the anti-globalization movement of Russia, the city of Moscow, May 18th, 2015. It's addressed to the consular section of the Embassy of the Russian Federation in Washington, D.C. and, oh, I'm sorry. One second. And it's an invitation, excuse me.
Read the first sentence of this.
Hereby, the regional non-governmental organization Anti-Globalization Movement of Russia invites Mr. Omali Yeshitela to participate in the lectures, which will be held in Moscow, 27th to 30th of May.
And read the third paragraph.
Hereby, we confirm that the lecturer's host will cover all expenses of Mr. Yeshitela, including local transportation, accommodation, and meals, as well as attendance of cultural events for the time period from the 26th of May, 2015 to the 31st of May, 2015.
Yeah, y'all heard that right. An NGO hosted and paid for a trip for Chairman Omali Yeshitela to go to another country to speak at a conference. It's legal and something that scholars, journalists, and activists, they do it all the time. The prosecution showed photos of Chairman Omali in Russia. Photos that were proudly and publicly posted on websites and social media sites of the Uhuru movement with complete transparency, showing the legitimate efforts of international solidarity and friendship that has always characterized the Uhuru movement. FBI witness Droop also read some messages that she said were in Penny Hess's Facebook account dealing with a petition that Hess helped to draft, charging the U.S. government with carrying out genocide against African people. The Russian NGO president, Ionov, offered to promote the petition through the group's international media contacts, helping to publicize the colonial conditions continuing to be endured by African people in the U.S. These exchanges between Hess and Anastasia Prochaska, an assistant to Ionov, reveal the stance of the Uhuru movement towards the relationship with the Russian activists to be one of cooperation, not servitude. Back to Prosecutor Marset and FBI agent Droop.
Can you please read the message?
Penny, will you post today the petition on change.org and the site of the White House? Uhuru, Anastasia, I can't. Please let me explain our understanding of this. In terms of the actual petition to the United Nations, we take this really seriously and want to do it correctly. In the early 1950s, a group presented a petition to the UN objecting to the conditions of African people. This was published in a book called We Charge Genocide. This is a 250-page document that goes deeply into the legal issues, as well as over 100 pages of documentation and evidence. In terms of submitting a petition to the UN, we cannot submit any kind of document that is less thorough and complete than that one. This would require us to call a committee that includes legal expertise and will take some time. We do not want to submit a document to the UN that is incomplete or shoddy in any way. We can post on the petition websites.
The statute that the Uhuru Three were falsely accused of violating defines a foreign agent as one who operates under the direction and control of a foreign government. We just heard directly from court transcripts one of the many examples where a member of the Uhuru Three declined to carry out a suggestion made by the Russian NGO, even though they had a friendly and mutually supportive relationship. Next, the government called Tetiana Zolotarova another FBI agent. Zolotarova was born in Ukraine. Her first language is actually Russian. She also speaks Ukrainian and English. She took the stand to swear that the translations she performed on Russian language messages for this case were accurate. I don't know why we should believe her in any case. The government then called up Anna Myers, who works in the FBI's counterintelligence division, to read some of those communications said to be conducted between Ionov and Popov. Born in Russia, Myers graduated from Florida State and used to be a police officer in Vero Beach, Florida. From the court transcripts, here are Prosecutor Risha Asakan with FBI agent Anna Myers.
Are you familiar with the term asset handler relationship?
Yes, a handler manages an asset, someone with intelligence access for a mutual benefit, gaining information or access while providing financial, legal, or immigration benefits.
Okay, Agent Myers, you have two large boxes next to you.
I do.
The government's exhibit,
The government's exhibit 252 appeared to be a Russian award certificate actually given to Alexander Ionov.
Please read the translation on page 2.
Following the coat of arms image, it says, "Dear Alexander Viktorovich, thank you for your active participation in promoting international friendship. Signature V. Putin, March 31st, 2014, Moscow."
The prosecution argued that this award was evidence of Ionov's role for Russian intelligence. But later in cross-examination, attorney Addie Griffin blew that away. Let's see how she did that. You ready, Addie?
You talked about an award that Putin supposedly gave Alexander Ionov.
Yes, or certificate. Mm-hmm.
And you said it looked official to you because it had a stamp to it?
It had a coat of arms and a signature.
And are you aware that the President of the United States hands out awards of scholastic excellence for students in America every year?
I'm not specifically, but I believe your statement.
And you're aware that they're signed by the president in that particular year?
I'm not sure. I don't know.
And you're aware that they're stamped with an official U.S. stamp?
I'm not aware.
Those awards of excellence don't make the students agents of our government, do they?
No.
Wow. Attorney Addie Griffin's cross-examination busted the prosecution's attempt to inflate a standard form letter as evidence that Ionov was a handler for Putin. Now we return to prosecuting attorney Asakan's direct examination of Agent Myers that introduced misleading and falsified so-called evidence of acting as Russian agents.
Agent Myers, can you please read Exhibit 275, which is a report that Alexander Ionov submitted to his supposed FSB handlers, Popov and Sukadolov.
After O'Malley Yeshitela's visit to Moscow in 2015, a bilateral cooperation program between ADR and Uhuru developed a reparations campaign, which was first introduced at the Black is Back Coalition conference. Alexander and O'Malley decided the campaign would conduct a reparations tour in 8 U.S. states at the end of 2015. Alexander financed this campaign fully. The program was expanded in 2016 to include monthly reparations tours, which had visited all major cities in 2019. As of 2017, a reparations school opened in Tampa, Miami, and New York, where activists took short-term training courses, as well as politics school for future participation in elections at the local level. In 2018, O'Malley Yeshitela gave a lecture on reparations and protecting the legal interests and Rights of African Americans in the USA at the Oxford Club. And at the end of 2015, after a conference in New York, the BLM movement added a demand for reparations to their agenda.
Again, they're saying that the Russians came up with the idea to campaign for reparations. They want the Russians to take credit for the chairman's winning debate at the Oxford University. Can you believe that? In his cross-examination of Anna Myers, Attorney Akbar draws out the difference between acting as an agent under the direction and control of a foreign government versus engaging in equal power cooperation. He also exposes the outrageous and offensive idea that the Uhuru movement's reparations work had been created and developed under Russian control starting in 2015.
Can we go to 275? So in this communication, he actually says, after Omali Yeshitela visits to Moscow in 2015, a bilateral cooperation program between AGR and Uhuru. Uhuru was developed including a reparations program for African American population in the US in the first sentence.
Correct.
What does the bilateral cooperation program mean?
It means it goes two ways.
It goes both ways. It's a cooperation.
Yes.
Another part that I guess I have trouble with is he's saying he helped Chairman Yeshitela create a reparations program. Is that what you're getting out of this in 2015?
Yes, that it was a joint effort.
Okay. And based on you being a part of this investigation, you know that the Uhuru Movement organization had been dealing with reparations for 50 years now, right?
I don't know the exact time frame.
But it's been a long time, longer than 2015.
Of course.
Of course, huh, Anna Myers? Well, the Uhuru movement has most definitely been engaged in reparations work longer than 2015. The African People's Socialist Party convened the first World Tribune for reparations to African people in 1982 in Brooklyn, New York, which led to the formation of the African People's Reparations Organization. At this conference were notable figures in the reparations movement such as Afeni Shakur, Dr. Leonard Jeffries, and others, which is documented in the book, The Verdict is In, Reparations Now. We Won't Stand for the Lies. The government prosecutors next called up FBI employee Tracy Cato, who participated in the raid at the Uhuru Solidarity Center in St. Louis. She described some of the photos she took of books, banners, and flyers. And then FBI agent Bill Tidwell from the Tampa office, another digital forensics examiner, took the stand and read off serial numbers from the computers and hard drives, off of which he said he pulled data and compiled reports as directed by his bosses to construct their framed up story. After Tidwell, Aaron Volk, an FBI agent from Kansas City, Missouri, took the stand. Before working for the FBI, Volk was with the military police for the U.S. Air Force. He imagined himself as a TV star as he explained his role to the jury during examination by prosecutor Asakon.
Well, if you've ever seen CSI, we do the CSI stuff. When there's crime scenes, we're the ones that go in the house, do the photos, look through the evidence. We specialize in the forensic searches.
Did you participate in a search in St. Louis in July 2022?
I did. I was the photographer at that search.
What did that entail?
So, as the photographer, our job is to essentially tell the story of the search. Everything from arrival, capturing what the search site looks like from the outside before you walk in, and then walking in and documenting, capturing photos of everything prior to starting the search. And so that includes like every single room. We're doing a 360 view to catch every corner, and while the search is occurring, as evidence is found, we're documenting the evidence as it's found. And then after the search is done, we document how we've left the scene as well.
What are we looking at in Government's Exhibit 33?
This is a bookshelf that was found on the second floor of the home, and it has a number of titles. One in particular that we took note of was there's 3 copies of a book called Amali Yeshatela Speaks.
What are we looking at on page 38?
This is like a campaign advertisement that we found in a box down in the basement for a gentleman named Jesse Neville, and it read, Jesse Neville for mayor, unity through reparations.
Well, wait. So Jesse Neville ran for mayor on a platform calling for unity through reparation. But I thought the government was accusing the Uhuru 3 of sowing discord under the direction of the Russian government, not promoting unity, right? Well, so again, the Department of Justice had a story to lie and fabricate and sent FBI agents to photograph, translate, compile, and construct the so-called evidence to try and discredit and imprison the voice of the African anti-colonial struggle. Professor Thomas Rid was at their service. Before we hear Rid's testimony, we'll hear again from Soliana Bakel, managing editor of the Burning Spear newspaper.
Uhuru and Uhuru, thank you, Mariah. I, of course, want to again remind our viewers to get a hold of copies of these brilliant books written by African People's Socialist Party Chairman Omali Yeshitela and African People's Solidarity Committee Chairwoman Penny Hess by placing an order on our website, theburningspear.store. So get one for yourself or buy several as gifts for the people in your circle. I want to show you some other historical memorabilia that you can own while supporting the ability of Burning Spear Media to keep publishing, keep criticizing the colonial mode of production, and keep spreading a vision for a world where everyone can live in peace and prosperity. If you're looking for gifts this season, we not only have books, we have posters, flags, and clothing. We have t-shirts from the 50th anniversary of the Burning Spear newspaper. That's right, we've been publishing since 1969, and it was not the Russians who told us to do it. We have reproductions of the cover of the Burning Spear newspaper that reported on the 1982 International Tribunal on Reparations for Black people in the U.S. We have posters with a large photo of Chairman Omali Yeshitela and Black Panther Party leader Huey P. Newton at an event at the Uhuru House in 1989, where he passed the torch, telling the audience that you may not have the Black Panther Party, but you have the Uhuru House. You may not have the Black Panther newspaper, but you have the Burning Spear. So they haven't done anything by crushing one organization. This was Huey's last speaking engagement before he was assassinated. The African liberation movement has a long trajectory of heroic struggle. The Russians didn't start it, and the U.S. government can't stop it. We also have African flags, as you can see on the screen, dashikis, and struggle bags on our store site, theburningspear.store. I really want to thank the new distributor of the Burning Spear newspaper in Punta Gorda, who has just placed their first order for a bundle of the Burning Spear. So go Punta Gorda. Since this broadcast began, we've also seen an order come in for a copy of the book Overturning the Culture of Violence by Penny Hess, one of the Uhuru 3. This is a great book. It's very well written. So again, please go to the burningspear.store today and support the right of the African working class to speak our own reality, come to our own conclusions, and plot a course for our own liberation. As we say, keep the spear burning. So back to you, Mariah, and the Burning Spear Media Readers Theater Troupe. Uhuru.
Thank you, Saliana. And I mean, I hope everyone go do your shopping at the burningspear.store. That's the burningspear.store. So next we'll hear excerpts from the testimony of FBI paid witness Thomas Rid, a professor of strategic studies at Johns Hopkins University, specializing in intelligence, cybersecurity, and disinformation. His testimony for the prosecution was basically a recap of the thesis of his book, entitled Active Measures, A History of Disinformation. Professor Rid argues that disinformation is not necessarily information that's false. It can include true information that makes America look bad. Uhuru 3 attorney Mataki Akbar exposed the repressive and anti-democratic nature of Rid's thesis.
Are you familiar with the African People's Socialist Party?
I've read the indictment, that's all.
Okay. Are police violence, racism, and peace valid concerns?
Yes, absolutely.
Is advocating against police violence divisive?
No, it is not.
Is censorship a valid concern in a country?
In some countries, yes, but not as much as and others.
Is censorship a concern in the United States?
That's a complicated question, not in the same way as in Russia, for example.
What about advocating for peace? Could that create division?
It could be exploited by foreign intelligence to create divisions.
Okay. Active measures often involve pretending to care about an issue without genuine concern, correct?
That's correct.
If a group's concerns are genuine, does that disqualify it as an active measure?
Not necessarily. Intelligence agencies can exploit genuine issues to provoke conflict.
If an organization puts out its own information but is encouraged by a foreign adversary, does that qualify as manipulation?
Not necessarily. Active measures can use factual information to provoke emotional reactions.
Mm-hmm. If a group's petition expresses genuine views and is supported by an adversary, does it qualify as manipulation?
It depends. If the views are genuine, they remain valid, even if funded by another party.
It depends, huh? Thomas read. Next up was another FBI agent, Andrea Bedford, a senior digital forensic examiner working in the Tampa field office. Bedford graduated from the University of Central Florida and previously worked for the Texas Department of Public Safety and the North Carolina Department of Justice. Her testimony consisted of reading serial numbers on a seized computer and hard drive from which she claimed to have pulled data and compiled a report for her boss. Then we heard from David Carlson, another FBI employee from the Tampa division. Carlson's been working for the FBI for over 20 years as an IT specialist, providing support for their IT equipment. He participated in the raid on the Uhuru house in St. Pete as a photographer. Prosecutor Asakan asked him to describe some of his photos.
What are we looking at on page 28?
This is a book from the bookshelf.
And what's the title of the book?
It's titled The Russian Revolution.
What are we looking at on 29?
Also a book from the bookshelf.
And what's the title of the book?
It's titled KGB, The Secret Work of Soviet Secret Agents.
And why did you photograph these books?
I was asked to take photos of them.
I was asked to take photos of them. Well, Uhuru 3 attorney Ida Griffin cross-examined Carlson.
Now, this is a picture you took of a bookshelf, correct?
It is.
This was actually found in the office of Amalia Shatella, is that right?
I don't recall what office it was found in.
Well, this picture is not complete, is it?
It's a picture of a bookshelf.
It's only the top half of a bookshelf.
It shows two of the, yes, partial.
At minimum, there's 6 levels to this particular bookshelf, isn't there?
There could be, yes.
And the entire bookshelf is filled with books, isn't it?
Yes, I can't tell from this picture, but if I recall correctly, yes.
If you recall going into that office, in fact, there's a bookshelf when you first come in that's 6 layers long, entirely filled up with books, right?
I don't recall that.
All right. And then if you turn, there's a room that's adjacent or next to the room that's got books and bookshelves on every single wall from floor to ceiling. Isn't that right, sir?
I don't recall. I took the pictures that I was asked to take.
Well, in this particular bookcase, we have a book called The Teamsters, right?
Yes, I see that.
Another one called Our Nation's Archives.
I do see that.
You would agree that there are several other books on this particular bookshelf just in these 2 levels here that are not pointed out by the government, correct?
Again, I took pictures of what I was asked to take pictures of.
Now, you held up a flag in this case that showed a dove, which was a peace symbol on it, right?
Yes.
And when you went into the Uhuru house, there were a number of other flags from other countries too, weren't there?
I don't recall other flags.
You don't recall the Mexican flag?
I don't recall seeing that.
You don't recall the Irish flag?
I don't recall seeing the Irish flag.
You don't recall the flag of Spain?
I don't recall, no.
You don't recall other flags from other African countries?
It's possible. I don't recall it at this point, no.
Wow, y'all hear this? I mean, I guess you see what you want to see. So the Uhuru movement is an African international movement extending and receiving solidarity from many countries and peoples all around the world. But all the government wanted to show with jury was the Russian flag. Prosecutors then called up Karen Cowan, another FBI photographer who participated in the raid on the Uhuru house in St. Petersburg. Cowan has worked for the FBI for 21 years and is based out of Orlando. Before joining the FBI, she worked in higher education administration at the University of South Florida. When asked by prosecutor Asakan, "What do you do at the FBI?" Cowan replied,
"I'm an intelligence analyst, someone who analyzes data and different types of material. We're very often known as the people who connect the dots."
But then Cowan was cross-examined by Uhuru 3 attorney Addie Griffin.
This document that you photographed on July 29th, 2022 at the Uhuru House in St. Petersburg, Florida, is titled "How to Get Out in the African World, the Significance of the Chairman's Presence in Russia at the AGMR's Dialogue of Nations Conference," correct?
Yes.
It starts, "The anti-globalization movement of Russia held the conference, the Dialogue of Nations. The chairman was invited and for the second time in a matter of weeks returned to Russia. The conference was attended by several groups, including a Puerto Rican group called the National Sovereign State of Bowen, the Sovereign State of Hawaii, the Catalan Solidarity for Independence from Spain, Polisario Sahari Front also won independence from Spain, the Irish Republican Socialist Party, who the chairman met in Belfast, Ireland in 1983, and who expressed solidarity with us then. The conference was acknowledged and recognized all over Eastern Europe and Russia. More than 80 media representatives were there. That was enough media to have an impact on knowledge of the struggle of African people throughout parts of Europe. The chairman did interviews with a lot of media. Did you see that?"
Yes.
And then it goes on and it indicates the chairman's demands that he's raised in that particular conference, the Dialogue of Nations, correct?
That's what it says, yes.
It says, A, recognize that Africans in the US are part of a dispersed African nation. B, call for the people of the world to express solidarity with African people, not just in general terms, but with our aspirations for self-determination and freedom from US colonialism. C, demand immediate withdrawal of the occupying police military force from Black communities. D, Black community control of police. E, reparations for centuries of slavery, exploitation, and oppression. F, release of African political prisoners and 1 million Africans locked up. G, recognition of the rights of African people to return to Africa. H, immediate recognition of the right of African people to armed self-defense from US colonialism and colonial terror. Did you see those demands?
Yes.
And those are expressed in this document as demands Chairman Omali Yeshitela took with him to the Dialogue of Nations conference that was held in Moscow, correct?
I am not part of the investigation. I am just the photographer of this document, so I can't comment on anything that was just read.
Karen said, "I'm not a part of this investigation." Well, the government brought 14 so-called witnesses, all of them paid to be there, 12 FBI employees, and 2 paid academic hacks. None of them had any direct knowledge or had even met any of the Uhuru 3 or the Russians who were supposedly pulling the strings on this dangerous conspiracy. As attorney Leonard Goodman begins cross-examination of Agent Kelly Bowen, the prosecution's star witness, the lead investigator in the Uhuru 3 case, the courtroom tensed with anticipation. Surely she will be the one to connect the dots and bring it home for the prosecution, right? Well, Bowen, who had overseen every detail of the investigation, obtaining search warrants, reviewing subpoenas, and coordinate all the efforts, answered questions with precision until the line of questioning forced her to reveal that the government lied.
This is the acceptance letter, August 26th, 2015. The African People's Socialist Party, APSP, accepts the invitation to Moscow, Russia for the Dialogue of Nations Conference. In a separate letter, we have a synopsis of our position on the struggle of African people. Do you see that?
Yes.
I'm going to read this quickly. Quote, "The position of the African People's Socialist Party regarding the struggle of African people for state power must be understood in the context that its African nation is a nation of a different type. Africans face dual colonization in our African homeland, and at the same time, we are colonized wherever else we are due to having been kidnapped and enslaved by our oppressors over the centuries. Since the end of legal slavery in the US, African people have lived under domestic colonialism as the colonizer and the colonized both live on the stolen land of indigenous people. We stand in unconditional solidarity with the right of indigenous and Mexican people to self-determination and sovereignty on their own land, end quote. And then he talks about the ultimate aim for our party. Do you see that?
Yes.
So the APSP has indicated that they do not support their own state for people of African descent in the United States. Do you agree?
Generally, they don't use the word like separate state in this document. Yes.
No, they say they have unconditional solidarity with indigenous people. Do you see that?
Yes.
And they would not claim their own state on land that they believe belongs to indigenous people. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So the condition that Ionov placed on the invitation that they must maintain their own state in the United States is not supported by this document, correct?
Yes.
In March 2022, after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Omali Yeshitela hosted Alex Ionov on his Omali Taught Me webinar series. Ionov shared his perspective on Russia and Ukraine, correct?
Yes.
It's common for the African People's Socialist Party to invite foreign speakers to share perspectives, correct?
Yes.
Omali Yeshitela's speeches disagreed with the United States' stance that the invasion was unprovoked, stating it was provoked by NATO's expansion and United States arming of Ukraine, correct?
Yes.
He also spoke about NATO's role and a 2014 coup replacing Ukraine's government with a NATO-friendly regime. He held these views since before meeting Ionov, correct?
Yes.
Attorney Addie Griffin continues the cross-examination of the prosecution's star and delivers the final earth-shattering blow to her testimony.
Can you remind me how long you've been on this particular case?
I was assigned the case in January or February 2022.
And are you an investigator?
Yes.
And in this case, you don't have any information to provide this to the jury other than things you either read or saw in videos, correct?
Yes.
So what you did as an investigator in this case is you served subpoenas on different agency, right, as part of your job?
We serve subpoenas, yes.
You served subpoenas to Yahoo, correct?
I think we probably subpoenaed Yahoo, yes.
And you have email accounts for our clients, yes?
We did a search warrant to Yahoo. I'm not sure we ever subpoenaed Yahoo.
Well, a search warrant or a subpoena, you have the information from Yahoo, correct?
Yes.
You have Apple iCloud account?
Yes.
You have bank accounts?
Yes.
You have WhatsApp account?
We have the information from the iCloud, which shows the WhatsApp information.
You had access to Facebook posts that were online?
Yes.
You had access to open sources?
Yes.
You had access to live stream events?
Yes.
You had access to websites and reviewed websites on the anti-globalization movement of Russia and the African People's Socialist Party, among others?
Yes.
And out of that information, you covered 13 terabytes of information, right?
That's probably correct. We requested a 20 terabyte drive to put it on. I think when the computer examiners do it, it's like double in size. So that sounds.
And you heard the testimony earlier that it would take over a lifetime to read that information?
Yes, the CART examiner said that.
You never met with Ionov, Popov, or any key witnesses, correct?
I did not.
You found no evidence that a PSP kidnapped, used force, traded weapons, or spied on behalf of the Russian government, correct?
Correct.
You never even received, they never even received substantial funds, did they?
They received $8,500. I would not characterize it as substantial.
You never found any evidence that our clients provided any guns, weapons to anyone, right?
That's correct.
There's no allegation that our clients ever were spies or provided top secret information to the Russians, correct?
That's correct.
So all the evidence you have is that our clients, my client specifically, Amalia Shatella, went to Moscow on 2 separate occasions to meet with like-minded people, correct?
That's correct. Generally, yes.
He spoke about the liberation of all African people across the world, correct?
I don't know the content of everything he spoke about, but that sounds correct.
You also found evidence of a petition charging the UN with genocide, correct?
Yes.
You would agree that's a political writing.
Yes.
Then they go back to Moscow in September, right? To meet with like-minded people.
Yes.
And then we come back and promote our petition with the political rally, which is the encampment tour, right?
That's correct.
We then speak out against the Ukraine war, correct?
Yes.
And then we invite Alexander Ionov to put out his views out on our media, right?
That's correct.
But we don't have any evidence whatsoever of any involvement of the Russian government in elections, even though it went out in your press release, correct?
Can you repeat the question?
You don't have any evidence of any Russian involvement in the elections, even though it went out to the American people in your press release.
The DOJ press release did discuss that, and there's communications, but there's not like a direct interference.
What you just testified to is those communications were someone attempting to contact Jesse Neville and him saying, contact Penny Hess, and no communications being done between Penny Hess and anybody regarding that issue.
That's correct.
So there was no evidence of that.
That's correct.
Yet it went out in a Department of Justice press release for this case, correct?
Yes.
And you knew as the lead agent that there was no evidence of that, didn't you?
Yes.
And you also included it in your discussions with the prosecutors here in their indictment, didn't you?
I was included in those discussions, yes.
And you knew at that time that there was absolutely no evidence of any election interference at all in this case.
There's evidence of them being involved in the elections.
There is evidence of them being involved in some elections. There isn't any evidence of the Russians being involved or influencing those elections at all, is there?
They seem not to influence the elections. That's correct.
Your testimony is the Russians seem to not influence the elections now?
Yes.
No further questions.
Y'all heard that? Well, the FBI stole and compiled so much data that it would take over a lifetime to read it all. 30 FBI agents worked the so-called investigation for 3 years. Despite a $10 million reward, they could find no one to come forward and testify against the Uhuru 3 except for their own paid employees. And their lead investigator just admitted that they lied when they said that Uhuru 3 had facilitated election interference by the Russian government. The government's last witness was FBI agent Corey Miller. His function in the prosecution's case was to provide proof that Sukhadolov was actually an FSB agent, since it was not possible to interview Sukhadolov or to get any confirmation from FSB itself. Miller testified that he had an in-person meeting with Sukhadolov in the U.S. in 2017, in the midst of the time period in which the FBI now argues that Sukhadolov was actively seeking to recruit and engage groups in the U.S. to sow discord on behalf of the Russian government. He said he met with Sukhadolov so that the FBI and FSB could cooperate by sharing information on terrorism. How did he know that Sukhadolov was with the FSB? He said that Sukhadolov gave him a baseball cap with an FSB logo on it. If Sukhadolov was indeed an FSB agent, then FBI agent Corey Miller was the only person in the courtroom that day who had actually met and talked with one of the Russians involved in the alleged conspiracy. Makes you wonder, huh? Was their meeting part of a conspiracy to frame up the Uhuru 3 and dismantle the First Amendment? So next up, we'll check out the cross-examination by Attorney Akbar.
In 2017, you had been with the FBI for a couple of years, right?
Yeah, approximately a year and some change.
And you're working for the counterterrorism unit at that time, right?
Yes, sir.
And you all did an exchange with the Russian FSB, you said.
Yes, sir.
And at that time, FSB was adversarial, or Russia was adversarial.
Yes, sir.
So when you met with somebody that's adversarial, when you meet with somebody that's adversarial, do you take extra precautions like conduct the background check on that person that you're meeting with?
Yes. Just to make sure they're not coming over to do anything against our government. Yes.
And that's important with the FBI, right? To make sure that you do a background and make sure that somebody is not coming to infringe or anything like that, right?
Yes.
Okay. We now know that in 2017, one of the people that you met with was actually a part of, I guess, an investigation where they were infiltrating American groups. Were you aware of that?
I was not aware of that.
Mm-hmm. Did you find out that he was part of a situation with a Russian individual named Alexander Ionov? Did you find out about that?
No, not as of today, no.
So with all this at your disposal, the FBI's disposal, you didn't know that this person that you were meeting with was actually a part of an investigation that was going against American interests?
At the time, no.
Because if you had a way of knowing, then you would not have had that meeting, correct?
Or at least that individual would not have been present.
Right. And that individual now is indicted.
Yes.
Right.
Well, that was the last witness for the prosecution. After Miller's testimony, Prosecutor Marset declared that the government rested their case. In our third and final episode, we'll see the evidence presented by the attorneys for the Uhuru 3. We'll hear excerpts from both sides' closing arguments, along with the jury instructions, and we'll hear some of the legal issues debated during sidebars and discussions with the judge. Finally, we'll recap the verdict and hear Chairman O'Malley's actual response. Spoiler alert, the Uhuru 3 were found not guilty of acting as agents of the Russian government. In a contradictory and unjust verdict, they were found guilty of conspiring to act as agents of the Russian government. They will return to the Tampa Federal Courthouse on December 16th for their sentencing hearing. The government plans to lock up 83-year-old Chairman O'Malley, Penny Hess, and Jesse Neville for 5 years and to fine them $250,000. We say not one day in prison. All freedom-loving people are encouraged to attend the sentencing hearing to show your support for the Uhuru 3. You can learn more at www.handsoffyahuru.org. That's www.handsoffyahuru.org. On the day before the sentencing, there will be a special Sunday rally at the Uhuru House in South St. Petersburg, and we encourage everyone who can to come on out or to watch it live on Burning Spear TV's YouTube channel beginning at 4 p.m. Eastern. I'm also excited to announce the last Hands Off Uhuru webinar before the sentencing to be broadcast on the Burning Spear TV YouTube channel on this Saturday, December 7th at 3 p.m. Eastern, entitled African People's Indictment of the U.S. Government. His program will explore the history of the government's unending conspiracy against the Black community and free speech. This historic date of the December 7th will be recognized as commemoration of the anti-colonial struggle of the indigenous Hawaiian people. So that's this Saturday, December 7th at 3 p.m. Eastern, live on the Burning Spear TV's YouTube channel. Don't miss it. Register to join on Zoom at handsoffyahuru.org/register. handsoffyahuru.org/register. We want to thank you all for joining us. Please share the link, subscribe to the Burning Spear TV channel on the YouTube, and spread the word, y'all. And remember, Uhuru means freedom.